They're on your screens, viewers. Amid statements that it is planning a ground invasion, the IDF has declared that Gaza will become a tent city. This is a quote, a tent city, and every building will be razed to the ground. A look at the visuals coming in from Gaza. You can see those pictures to the left of your screens, viewers. And it appears that Israel is serious about following through with its pronouncement. Several thousand Gaza residents are homeless. Many have lost their kin and many children have been rushed to hospital after they were injured. They're not accusing Israel of carrying out simply an attack to go out there and neutralize Hamas, but they're actually accusing Israel carrying out a vengeful operation to kill innocent Muslims. This is what is being said, viewers, on the ground in Gaza. Let's listen in.
We cannot contain burials in a specific place, so graves are dug randomly in various places, around houses and in places donated by landowners. People can't find food in their homes, and there's an extremely tough social condition in Gaza. Siege above siege, and all of this is happening because of the siege. Where should our people go? We've been besieged for 18 years. Where should we go? Where do we release the anger on occupation? Who bears the responsibility for this siege and this criminality?
As of now, the Israeli administration is in no mood to listen. They've rejected claims that they are acting illegally or out of a sense of vendetta. Listen in.
את כל המקומות שהחמאס נערך בהם, של עיר הרשע הזאת, כל המקומות שהחמאס מסתתר בהם, פועל מתוכם, נהפוך אותם לאיי חורבות. אני אומר לתושבי עזה, צאו משם עכשיו, כי אנחנו נפעל בכל מקום.
We were struck Saturday by an attack whose savagery I can say we have not seen since the Holocaust. I mean, we had hundreds massacred, families wiped out in their beds in their homes, women brutally raped and murdered. We've never seen such savagery in the history of the state. And they're even worse than ISIS.
Viewers, as the Israelis escalate their counter-offensive, the casualties will mount in Gaza. Several rights activists, columnists, Palestinians and Arab states are already urging Israel to stop the wanton destruction of Gaza. The UN has flagged the possibility of a massive humanitarian disaster given that Israel has sealed off the strip, cut water and electricity. Tel Aviv is being accused of trampling over human rights in pursuit of Hamas terrorists on the strip. Israel is saying that it is acting within its rights to punish terror. It is lawfully bound by its own constitution to protect its own sovereignty. The hard facts suggest that many of those criticizing Israel today are forgetting precedents where some nations, including Arab and Middle Eastern ones, pursued terrorists and other antagonists in cross-border action. While this is not to suggest that two wrongs or two acts of retribution make a right, here are the hard facts, viewers, for us to hear. Israel is being villainized, but have those that are pointing fingers at them forgotten these precedents? In 1990, Iraq invades Kuwait to reportedly, and no one really knows the reason, but reportedly avoid repaying a $14 billion loan taken from the Emirates during the Iran-Iraq war. In 2001, Pakistan aided the United States-led coalition attack on Afghanistan to dislodge the Taliban post 9/11. In 2015, Qatar deployed 1,000 ground troops along with armored vehicles and helicopters to Yemen to fight Houthi rebels there. In 2020, Iran launched Operation Martyr Soleimani by firing ballistic missiles at US air bases in western Iraq. Again, cross-border strike, viewers. 2020, US State Department claimed Iran's carried out 360 targeted assassinations and mass bombings in other countries. All of them on foreign soil, obviously, viewers. 2022, Saudi coalition launched strikes into Yemen to neutralize Houthi rebels. Several civilians were killed. No one was thinking about Muslim lives. In 2023, Turkish forces killed 58 Kurdish militants in strikes in Syria to avenge Ankara's bomb attack, or a bomb attack on Ankara. Now, viewers, let's open this up for a meaty conversation. We're joined by Michael Kugelman, who needs no introduction. He is part of a very influential think tank, director of the South Asia Institute Wilson Center. He joins us from Washington, D.C. to look at the longer view. We have with us Kanwal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary, and of course, Chancellor of Jawaharlal Nehru University. We're also going to be joined by Lieutenant General S.A. Hasnain, former GOC 15 Corps of the Indian Army. And we also have with us Professor Walter C. Ladwick, Senior Lecturer, Associate Professor, International Relations at King's College, London. Thank you all for speaking with me on the hard facts. And I want to begin first with Mr. Kugelman. Mr. Kugelman, obviously, there is going to be a lot of footage that is going to be put out now of the consequences of the Israeli counter-strike on Gaza. And it becomes very difficult to be objective about the bloodletting. Let's be honest. We're all humans first, and no one wants to see children in harm's way on either side of the border. Nonetheless, how far should Israel go, given that those pictures will be used now, obviously, to paint Israel as a villain? Is the target of reducing Gaza to a tent city a legitimate one?
Well, I mean, clearly, what Israel experienced on Saturday was indeed something that it has not experienced since it was founded. In terms of the number of people it lost in a single day, and what we've seen over Israel's history is a tendency to strike back very hard and oftentimes disproportionately when hit by terrorism. And given just how incredibly brutal and horrific these Hamas attacks were, we could assume indeed that Israel will hit back as hard as possible. And indeed, we don't know exactly what Israel is going to do, but there is talk about an actual ground invasion of Gaza, which could indeed be devastating for the Palestinian public, Palestinian civilians. Clearly, the goal must be to eliminate or at least reduce the capacity of Hamas to operate. But I think Israel is going to hit very hard. And I think at the end of the day, it may not be that sympathetic to pleas and concerns of the outside world about needing to be careful not to go too far, though I think it's clear that the U.S. and other key allies of Israel will try to urge Israel not to do anything that could be too excessive. But Israel is in a very tough spot. I mean, let's be very clear. What it experienced on Saturday was absolutely horrific, and one cannot blame it for wanting to respond as robustly as it likely will, even though there certainly are clear costs and risks that go beyond the large number of civilians that could be impacted if it were to go that far. But I think that at this point in time, its key allies, including the U.S., are fully behind it. That's an important consideration as well.
Well, let's be a little more specific, Mr. Kugelman, because yes, of course, Israel reserves the right to strike back and deep into Gaza and take out the Hamas. But I was sort of wanting to pick at a narrower seam, which is how far should Israel go? Should it go to its stated intent of reducing Gaza to a tent city? Is that a legitimate aspiration on its part? Target, mission, call it what you want.
No, I mean, that would not be a legitimate mission in my view. The notion of destroying Gaza, I mean, there's nothing legitimate about that. But look, Israel has a challenge that its main goal is to target Hamas. But as you know, the demographics and the geography of Gaza are such that it's very difficult to target Hamas without also impacting and hitting civilians. It's a very densely populated region, and Hamas knows that. It purposely surrounds itself, positions positions itself in places where it's impossible to get at it without also impacting and hurting civilians. So this is the tough spot that Israel faces, for sure.
Let me bring in Professor Ladwig, and after that, Kamal Sibal to take the conversation in a slightly different direction. Professor Ladwig, can Israel, the original victim here, be villainized for securing its territorial integrity? Where you're speaking to us from, in London, there were a large number of protests against Israel by a large number of groups, of course, that led to a clash because there were pro-Israel groups that also showed up on the streets. And we saw quite the melee. Now, I want to ask you, is this creeping attempt by one side of the ideological divide to paint the original victim here as a villain a legitimate one, or is it part of a propaganda that has had its day?
Well, the original question that you posed on what effect these images is going to have on public opinion around the world is really the heart of this. You know, in the last several years, Israel has been strengthening its geopolitical position through a series of normalization efforts with many of its Middle Eastern neighbors. There are some who suggest that following the Abraham Accords, that one of the key motives behind this Hamas attack, if Iran is really a patron in it, is to disrupt this creeping normalization between Israel and Saudi. And pictures of what seems to be either a disproportionate or illegal collective punishment, collective response, that's going to harden attitudes in a variety of Arab countries and make it much harder for those governments to reach the kind of accord that they actually want with Israel. And as you noted, in Western Europe, where governments have put out very strong messages of support for Israel, there are people on the streets who are already mobilizing. So the images that come out are going to be very powerful.
But is this quest to paint now, in this advanced stage of the campaign, Israel as the villain a legitimate one, Professor Ladwig?
It seems to be, at least as far as I can read here in London, to be put forth by groups that have been found in the past to be sympathetic to, the Syrian government, that have links to the Russian government and so forth. So I think there are a lot of questions about their authenticity.
And remember, viewers, that the Syrian governments or the Russian governments aren't, they've crossed borders several times, as we know, viewers, and they've taken out legitimate and also, of course, civilian targets across borders on several occasions. So there are no angels here. So let's open this up further. Mr. Sibal, let me bring you into the conversation now. Should Israel launch a full ground invasion, and will that escalate the war to involve other Arab states? Mr. Sibal.
Well, I don't know if Israel is ready to launch a ground invasion, because that will mean a lot of casualties on the Israeli side, and of course means the destruction of Gaza. They did that before, some years ago, and it proved a disaster. Eventually, they just left Gaza to its own devices and withdrew completely. So it is open to question whether they'll do it again, although they are saying that they'll do it. That is one thing. The other is that even if they do a ground invasion, are they sure that they will be able to get hold of the Hamas fighters, the Hamas terrorists effectively? And in the process, of course, there are these hostages. Earlier on, as you know, Israel was extremely sensitive on the issue of hostages, to the point that they would exchange one Israeli hostage with 4,000 or 8,000, Palestinians which were imprisoned by them. Now, here we are talking about more than 100 hostages. So will they sacrifice these hostages? What will be the impact of that on Israeli public opinion? What if the Hamas start diffusing photographs of hostages being beheaded and this and that? How that will affect public opinion? It's a very risky situation for Israel. Now, as you know, Secretary of State Blinken was in Tel Aviv And he is also advising caution and saying that democracies have to live up to different standards. In other words, they don't want Israel to do what it intends to do, is to flatten Gaza. As it is, they have stopped all supplies of fuel, water, and that is, of course, punishing the entire Gazan community. Now, this may be justified from their point of view because they have suffered really big trauma. But then the world will watch and see whether Israel is using disproportionate methods or disproportionate force to deal with what was a genuine and very serious provocation, and more than a provocation, by the Hamas to the Israelis. And Hamas actually wants to play this game. You know, the jihadi mindset, they don't mind sacrificing themselves and people around them. They want Israel to react with disproportionate force so that Israel loses the image it has of a country that has been always victim of history. Now here, the, Israel would appear as a country which is using excessive force and is discarding all humanitarian considerations. And then, of course, along with this is the fact that the Arab street will rise up. I tell you, the reason why Saudi Arabia and UAE have talked to President Raisi of Iran is because they are becoming sensitive to the sentiment in the Arab street. And they don't want to put their own regimes in danger if this whole thing flares up. There are a lot of imponderables in this, and unfortunately, this region has been caught in this turmoil, which affects us also. You know,
yeah, we'll come to that. Let's break this down. We'll come to that. But Mr. Sibal, I want to ask you: has the Palestinian cause been irreparably damaged by the actions of Hamas? And also, let's not forget that I'm not saying a majority, but a fair share of Palestinians have voted for Hamas. In fact, about a year back, if I'm not mistaken, or earlier this year, and I had the details, I've not got them with me right now, but a particular organization in Gaza conducted a poll, and it seemed to conclude that more than 50% of Palestinians would vote for Hamas. And we know the Hamas charter reads like some sort of an ISIS manual.
You see, Rahul, look, the Palestinian cause is not identical with what Hamas wants to do. There is the West Bank. That's a far bigger part of the whole problem that we have, because that's a far bigger area, and the Palestinian National Authority does not at all relate to what Hamas is doing. You know, they are peaceful. They are not terrorists. And the issue of two independent states is very much on the international agenda. There are UN resolutions to that effect.
Yes.
All the countries are committed to it, so it can't be sidelined. Now, there is a lot of criticism of Prime Minister Netanyahu by political leaders in Israel itself, that his current government, which has extreme far-right people in it with messianic thinking, has been responsible for the crisis that has been created. Some very serious political figures in Israel are saying that. So the issue is a bit clouded. And then there is, as you know, Rahul, a great deal of literature which is credible, that actually the game plan of Netanyahu was to build up Hamas against the Palestinian National Authority to make sure that the two-state solution never materialized. And they allowed a lot of money, millions and millions of dollars of Qatari money, to be funneled into Hamas. So there are a lot of wheels within wheels in all this, and a mess has been created. But to answer your question, let us not conflate what the Hamas has done, the unspeakable crimes they have committed, with the larger Palestinian question.
Okay, let's separate that for the moment. Okay, General Hussain, thank you for joining us. Would a ground invasion create a vacuum in Gaza and only dim the prospects of a negotiated peace, if it were to come to that? And I'm only going by what the IDF seems to have sort of put out there yesterday.
Thank you, Rahul. Thank you for having me in your program. I first of all don't expect that the IDF as such is going to undertake a major ground incursion into Gaza for the moment. A lot of wise counsel given by Mr. Kamal Sibbal just now. The whole issue of the 130 hostages, etc., is very much there. But in situations such as this, a government which is seen to have failed in its initial intelligence assessment itself is bound to respond in some manner in which to regain some of that respect that it had within the community itself. So from that angle, it is always possible that some kind of a incursion will be done. But going into Gaza, carrying out an incursion, fighting in built-up areas, as very correctly said, they are most likely to get more casualties on themselves. And nothing is going to be achieved from it. What you can expect, what one should expect is some kind of special forces operations to try and take out some of the hostages. Now, this is not a situation in which there are 3 or 4 or 5. There are 130 of them. But at least some of them, if they are taken out, and the threat alive for Hamas, maybe Hamas will look at it in a slightly different way. But I still continue to think Hamas has actually used a strategy of a combination of what Anwar Sadat did in 1973 and what the ISIS did in 2014. That is, used brutality as a strategic weapon, used strategic surprise and deception, going only up to a point, withdrawing as it did in 1973, taking hostages, and now from behind the hostages carrying out its operations. That is the manner in which this war is going to pan out. It's not going to just become a simple conventional war until the hostage problem is actually resolved.
Let me come back to Mr. Kugelman. Mr. Kugelman, the West has stood firmly behind Israel. In fact, foreign ministers of at least 2 countries, including yours, have landed in Israel to stand by the leadership there. Now, does that risk in any way sucking a number of other Western democracies into this conflict? Number one. Number two, does it therefore also mean that you're going to find a polarization where all the Arab states and perhaps even Iran are going to get together and try to sort of prop up the Palestinian cause once again, creating a fracture in the Middle East? Do you see that happening?
Well, to your first question, indeed, Washington and many, if not most, other Western capitals view this current conflict through the lens of terrorism, because it was triggered. The proximate cause of this new war was Hamas attacks, terrorist attacks. And so it's natural, given the position that most Western capitals take on the issue of terrorism, it's only natural that they would rally behind Israel and express solidarity with it. And of course, this is, at least initially, this is how India's government responded as well, given the 2 tweets from Prime Minister Modi pointing explicitly to the issue of terrorism. But I think that to get to your other question, it's complicated, right? Indeed, the U.S. and other Western players have very important partnerships with many of the countries of the Middle East, including in the Arab world. And for the U.S., the Abraham Accords are a really important priority. And we could talk about how there's so many things that the Trump administration did on the foreign policy realm that the Biden administration didn't care for at all. But the Abraham Accords issue is one of the exceptions. There is a very strong desire on bipartisan levels, and certainly with the Biden administration, to continue to do whatever is possible to ensure that Israel is able to normalize relations with more and more of its Arab partners. And indeed, at this point in time, that's the very question. Is that goal in doubt and could have gone up in smoke? And I would argue that the longer...
I think we're having a small audio glitch with you, Michael Kugelman. It's just sort of come across. I think we're going to try and rectify that. Let me bring in Professor Ladwick. Professor Ladwick, yes, the Abraham Accords, tectonic shift in the Middle East with regards to the West. Are they going to be safe, or are you going to see an unraveling after this?
They're certainly going to be under pressure. I think, again, a lot depends on how Israel's response plays out and the visuals that we get. I think we should not forget the underlying political dynamics in the region, which is the rivalry between Saudi and Iran. That is not going to go away, and I don't think this will paper over those real strategic differences that sort of set up the so-called Cold War in the Gulf and West Asia. But these will certainly be stressed. They will certainly be stressed.
But not to the point of break? What do you think?
I don't think to the point of breaking. I don't think the point of breaking. These various countries have had their own independent political reasons for seeking some degree of recognition or rapprochement with Israel, and that will exist, even if on the street, as the former secretary has indicated, public opinion is very strong and heated.
Well, Mr. Sybil, this is an important factor, because if the Abraham Accords stand up and survive this particular crisis, especially because the West and maybe some of these Arab nations can interlocute, then that also gives hope for India and the new corridor that India has forged through the Middle East into Europe. Would you see it that way, or do you think that the Prime Minister's stand, where at least publicly he has stood very firmly in Israel's bloc, in Israel's quarter, will lead to perhaps stresses between New Delhi and some of the Gulf countries, as well as, of course, Iran and others?
You can make the argument that the pushing the Abraham Accords, the manner in which it was done, was possibly a strategic mistake. Because they were based on the assumption that the Palestine question, the issue of two independent states and all that, could be isolated from the larger issues in the Gulf and in their relations with Israel. And that has actually proved to be wrong. Because, the Americans went ahead and opened their mission in Jerusalem. They stopped all aid to the Palestinian National Authority. They made in fact, they walked away from the two-state solution effectively. Because the Gulf states, they wanted to become modern. They wanted economic development. They have huge projects of 2030 vision, which requires peace and stability. So they were willing to open out to Israel. And hence the ITU2 and the India, Middle East, Europe corridor projects. But as I said, it was not sufficiently factored in what would be the consequences of totally ignoring the Palestinian issue. And that's where the Hamas has come in with the absolutely brutal terrorist attacks, which have brought the Palestinian issue right in the middle of what is being discussed in this region. Now, the Abraham Accords were, in a sense, to divide the Arab world from Iran and what have you. But ironically now, it seems that it is having the opposite effect of at least temporarily bringing Iran and Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states together. And the Saudi prince and the UAE President Sheikh have had long conversations with Iran. Now, I think this is going to affect the whole process of gaining the maximum economic and technological and other benefits from the Abraham Accords for this region and for Israel and for India. And these two projects, unfortunately, will be on hold for the time being. And the focus is bound to shift on some solution in the West Bank.
Well, let's face it, because India has been one of those regional players, powerful regional players, that has actually been able to transcend both our ties with Palestine as well as, of course, with Israel. The Prime Minister himself in 2018 went to Palestine. He was also given a state honor there. Of course, his relationship with Netanyahu and India's with Israel has been very firmly shepherded over the last few years. So I'm asking you, Mr. Sybil, how do you see the Prime Minister's initial response to this entire issue? He's being very, very badly criticized in a certain section of the political establishment in this country for not also going out there and criticizing Israel for some amount of onus for these attacks.
I think there's a logic to what Prime Minister did. If you notice that in the previous years, we have made terrorism, the issue of terrorism, a center plank of our foreign policy effort to mobilize international opinion against it. In all joint statements that we've issued with major countries, US and others, EU, individual countries, there is a long paragraph on terrorism. In the G7 meeting, there is a long paragraph on terrorism. In G20, there is. And what is the central feature of all this? That no cause justifies terrorism. Zero tolerance for terrorism. Now, if he had made a statement where he slammed what Hamas had done by way of his terrorist attacks, and then spoke about Palestine and the need to resolve this issue, which means that you are admitting there is a cause. Now, I don't think that would have been the right approach. It is for the foreign ministry at some stage to lay out the broad principles of our larger political approach to this question, and at some stage, I'm sure they'll do it. Unfortunately, this has got caught into domestic politics, and hence possibly a delay from the foreign ministry to explain its position. There is no way that India will or can withdraw from all the UN resolutions and its established position, not only of India, but the rest of the world, formally for a two-state solution. Now, what the contours of that two-state would be is always a matter of discussion. And if at the appropriate time, there is a multilateral process which is started to see some solution, India can join it. And it's for the Americans and the Europeans actually to initiate a multilateral process. It is needed at this time. So let's see what happens. But I don't think that this will materially affect, we earlier questioned our relations with the Gulf countries, because the Gulf countries have taken a moderate position. If you look at the initial statements, they have been moderate. Now they are being compelled by circumstances and the revulsion of the Arab street to what is being done to the people in the Gaza Strip, that is forcing them to slightly change their position, and hence this talk between Iran and Saudi Arabia to have some kind of a mutual understanding on how to handle this issue. But the fact is that they want to take a moderate position. They are open to relations with Israel. So we have to see how we'll be able to do that once the current pressures that we are seeing are out of the way.
Let me bring in General Hasnain on this point. General Hasnain, the root cause line, quote unquote, the root cause line being peddled by the Congress and others here in India. Do you believe it's a slippery slope, given the fact that someone could tomorrow legitimately say that terror attacks that are taking place in Kashmir, for example, will continue to take place because, hey, we haven't addressed the root cause. And if I'm not mistaken, that's exactly what Pakistan says. It said it even after the 26/11 attacks here in India. So do you think that this is just an attempt to play to a political constituency, or does this have a moral basis? That is the opposition's line, this root cause line.
See, Rahul, it is very clear that the Prime Minister's tweet, right at the beginning, actually isolated the happenings of 6th, 7th of October 2023. All he did was he just looked at that action. And we are the oldest sufferers of international terrorism. We know transnational terrorism. No one knows it better than us. And therefore, it was only, I think, morally correct that the Prime Minister put it out that we are against this terrorist act, against the acts of terrorism, brutality, which has been followed, which has been executed by the Hamas. And the rest of the policy issues, as Mr. Kamal Sibal very correctly says, was left for the MEA to follow up. Now, I feel the opposition here has gone back to reiterating the traditional Indian stand, which was not spoken about by our Prime Minister. Our Prime Minister only dwelt upon the context of what happened on the 6th and 7th. And therefore, I think both the sides, the opposition and the government, are actually saying two different things completely.
Yes.
As Mr. Kamal Sibal very correctly again said, our traditional stand of supporting the Palestinians, in fact, our balanced stand since 1992, when we forged relations with Israel, since then our relationship has been absolutely balanced. You yourself just reiterated 2018. There can't be a better example than the year 2018 when we found 2 and 4th visits taking place between India and West Asia. Mr. Modi himself having gone to West Bank at that particular time. So no one can deny the fact that India has been deeply involved with the Palestinian issue and supporting the Palestinians. And in fact, our neutral position on this whole stand can actually assist in anything, some new initiatives coming up in the near future. So I don't think the statements by the opposition in India has been in the correct context or not been realistic enough, because they should have commented on the actual context of what is happening at the moment.
Right.
The traditional Indian stand and support for Palestine is something we have always reiterated.
So let me open this up to also Mr. Michael Kugelman. Is there a moral justification to peddle the root cause line at this moment, at least in this context?
Well, I mean, this is just, as you know, a very complex story. And I think that for many people, for many observers and analysts, including in Israel, this is not a story that started with this horrific Hamas attack. And that's quite notable that some of the Israeli media, including Haaretz, one of the major Indian news outlets, have featured some commentaries that essentially bring attention to the way in which Israel has treated Palestinians in Gaza, and its policies toward the Palestinians over the years contributed to the conditions that led Hamas to carry out this horrific attack. So that certainly is a root cause issue. It's a very complex matter, but certainly I think that we all live in the here and now, and I think at the same time one has to give credence to those that look at this crisis and say, well, look, this started with this horrific attack by Hamas, the worst attack on Israeli soil since Israel became an independent state, and that's an important consideration as well. But that's why this is such a fraught issue. This is why this is such a complex issue. Both perspectives are accurate to a different degree, but I would argue that we definitely have to look at the very complex history here, and that includes Israel's policies toward the Palestinians for many years, and particularly when it comes to the brutal conditions that they have subjected Palestinians to for many years as well. That is something that one cannot ignore, for sure.
Let me bring in Professor Ladwick. Professor Ladwick, the root cause line, and this is important, we must get to the bottom of this, at this moment in time would seem to give cover to acts of wanton terror. Would you agree with me? Or do you think that, look, we can't ignore it, and therefore, if the Hamas felt that it was being pushed to a wall, then what could it do, and this, that, the other?
I think you've hit the nail on the head exactly. It's a question of when and where we have this conversation, right? As bodies are still being buried, as photographs are reaching out to us, it does seem pretty horrific and distasteful to get into sort of root cause conversations. It can often seem to be deployed to justify or explain away terrible brutalities. But that being said, as Michael Kugelman said, this is a complex conflict with a history, with conditions that are brought about in part by the particular political constellation that you have in power in Israel. So this didn't come from nowhere, right? This wasn't something that just poofed onto the scene and nobody could have foreseen or predicted it. And there is plenty of time to work through those issues and discuss them. But again, probably not while victims are still being buried.
Final question to you, Kamal Sibal. Whenever you speak to any Palestinian, and I have spoken to a large number of diplomats as well as, of course, interlocutors, they've been very clear. They've said that it's Israel that's to blame for this. We were pushed to the wall. We're not surprised that Hamas has hit back. I want to ask you, had perhaps, and this is a two-way question, had perhaps Hamas not been there, could this point have been made better to sort of paint Israel black? But because Hamas itself rejects any prospect of a dialogue with Israel, did it actually become part of a problem?
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. I mean, even one accepts that there is very deep frustration on the Palestinian side, and the younger generation is alienated from the Palestinian National Authority because they feel that they are corrupt and they play the game of the Israelis, and the youth want more violent action to assert their rights. And Hamas has been able to mobilize them, and they have staged these horrific acts of terrorism. That argument can be made, but the point is that neither the Israeli state, even if they have expanded their settlements, and even if occasionally and pretty frequently some Palestinians are shot even in the West Bank, and their right-wing fanatics are actually making life difficult for the Palestinians, the Israeli state has never engaged in such brutal terrorist acts. Neither the Palestinians on the West Bank have done that. Occasionally, yes, there is a person who in a vehicle overruns the Israelis or this or that, but nothing of this scale. What Hamas has done, by any yardstick, is unacceptable as a terrorist act. Just killing, mowing down civilians, women, children, and this and that, wreak vengeance, and their whole agenda of pushing Israel into the sea, when actually major Arab states, leave the rest of the world, have accepted the existence of the Israeli state. Even Hamas accepted it some years ago when they won the elections initially. And then there was a breakup between Hamas and the West Bank leaders and the Palestinian National Authority. So, I mean, to answer your question, yes, Hamas has not done any service to the Palestinian cause, though in a very indirect way, it brings the Palestinian cause back into the center of West Asian politics.
Right.
And therefore, all countries concerned
but
have to look
perhaps for
very
the wrong reasons, Kamal Sibal, but perhaps for the wrong reasons.
for the wrong reasons, but now they'll have to focus on some kind of an
I'll leave it at that. I think we've had a very meaty discussion. The reason, viewers, why I have resisted the temptation of bringing on politicians tonight is because we were accused yesterday, at least I was, of trying to suggest that siding with Israel is to basically betray the humanitarian aspect of this story, which is the subjugation, the alleged subjugation of Palestinians. Now, you've heard 4 experts say that the context matters, and in this limited context, to equivocate would be to indulge in whataboutery and perhaps even create some sort of a legitimacy for terror. I think there has been a degree of unanimity, and I can only say, and I'm only hazarding this comment, that perhaps as a confidence-building measure, the time has come for the Arab street, that is the Arab world, and perhaps even Palestinians to denounce the Hamas unequivocally, because that would be to take perhaps the high road to statesmanship. I'll take a short break. I'll be right back. Don't go away.
Strong elite force on the ground attacked the fortified Gaza fence. Videos issued by Hamas are said to show fighters breaching the security fences. It also released video of drones it says it used for border surveillance. The final part involved moving hostages to Gaza, mostly achieved early in the attack, a source close to Hamas said. In one well-publicized hostage-taking, fighters abducted partygoers fleeing a rave near the kibbutz of Re'im near Gaza. One analyst told Reuters that Hamas probably succeeded beyond their expectation, but now they'll have to, quote, deal with an Israel determined to decimate them.
רבה מברך לעלם ולעלמי עלמיה יתברך שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
Viewers, a massive controversy has broken out after, and you can see those pictures if you don't believe me, after Indian cricket fans in Hyderabad cheered lustily for the Pakistani cricket team, spurring them on to beat Sri Lanka. If that was jarring, then in Ahmedabad, the Pakistan cricket team was given a rousing welcome with dhol and a flower shower to boot, as if they were heroes. Many, including politicians, have slammed the support for Pakistan's cricket team. Many have said that feting Pak players is a cruel betrayal of the sacrifices of martyrs who have sacrificed everything fighting cross-border terrorism that emanates from Pakistan, and terrorism which has never been denounced by any of these Pakistani cricketers who call themselves the ambassadors of peace. Others have pointed out that Pakistan's cricketers don't see themselves as ambassadors of a sport, but as soldiers of Islam. Here are the hard facts that go to some extent to bear this out. Yes, viewers, they've crossed the line and they don't deserve to be cheered, and these are the reasons. Pakistan players joined the Tablighi Jamaat, a large number of them, and forced fellow players to convert. I haven't said this. This is recorded fact that has been well publicized in the Pakistani press. The Hindu member of the Pakistan team, Anil Dalpat, and I'm not talking about now, I'm talking about a decade and a half back, said minority players like himself were told to convert. Ex-Pakistan manager P. Mir, after Pakistan lost the World Cup in 2007, said that the Pakistani cricket players were more enthusiastic to convert non-Muslims than play cricket. Waqar Yunus lauded Rizwan for offering namaz on the ground, surrounded, as he said, by Hindus. This is after, of course, viewers, Pakistan defeated us in the T20 World Cup. In 2021, Pakistan netas called victory over India in the T20 World Cup as a win for Islam. I'm not saying it, that man on your screen said it, and he was once the Interior Minister of Pakistan, the Home Minister of Pakistan, viewers. Let's open this up. Let's go across to Sanjay Jha and Abhijit Iyer Mitra. Abhijit Iyer Mitra, I don't know where to begin. Should I excoriate Indian cricket fans or the BCCI? I don't know who. Can you help me out here?
Rahul, not just the BCCI, the government also. Remember, the Indian High Commission in Islamabad actually reached out. They called up Pakistani journalists and told them to apply for visas. When did BCCI start deciding Indian cricket policy or Indian visa policy? Now, you can call them over for, having these games and things like that. Sure, it is your international obligation. There is, you can't help it. Fine.
Now, that's what I was about to say.
Do you have to go on these cringe-inducing? I don't know what it is. Some very uncharitable words come to mind. But both here and at the Hyderabad hotel, what was the need for all this tamasha? Now understand. Let's look at people here. Let's not go by history. Let's look at the history of the people here itself. This boy Afridi, do you remember during the abrogation of 370 and even before and after that, what all his father-in-law has said, left, right, and center? Has he ever condemned his father-in-law? How is he celebrated and feted like this when his father-in-law talks nonsense? Second, do you remember what Babar Azam said in the last, I don't know what match it was, Kya kufar mar gaya or something like that? He said that, no?
Yes.
Has he ever been asked to condemn it? No. So, there is some iota of shame or decency that I expect from the BCCI, and sadly they are such sold out people who just see money, that they will sell their country out, their dignity of their country out for anything. 30 pieces of silver.
But let me ask you this, because this is an important conversation. Mr. Mitra, of course, according to the ICC rules, if you had boycotted, let's assume, if the BCCI said nothing doing, we can't have Pakistan here, we would have lost the right to, or forfeited the right to host the World Cup, number one. Number two,
but did you have to organize all that dancing at the stadium and everything like that?
Right. So I want to ask you, because, under normal circumstances, one hates to rake up this thing called the Tebet test. You know about the Tebet test. I'm not one to support it. But what about cricket fans? I mean, should not some responsibility also devolve upon some of us who went there and cheered for Pakistan as if, I don't know what they were expecting.
Rahul, something. How many people in India are you aware that actually tune into political conversations and things like that? India would much rather prefer to watch things like Saas Bhi Kabhi Bahu Thi and those horrendous Ekta Kapoor serials where Rasode Mein Kya Tha and, mother-in-law slapping.
No, but Mr. Mitra, look, we all know, I mean, you don't have to be reading the front page of the newspaper every day to know that Pakistan exports terror. On a daily basis, we are being touched by terror. We are losing relatives and friends to terror.
The population is not a high IQ population, Rahul.
Okay. Let me bring in Sanjay Jha. I think Abhijit Iyer Mitra, I'm ready to stick my neck out, which I have in an article. I would say that the Indian public, fine, the BCCI letting people down, but we can actually change this by not watching those matches. I certainly don't watch Pakistan play. Cross my heart, viewers. I don't. And I'm not going to be watching on Saturday. I've even written a piece. I am one of those who was externed from my own home because of Pakistani terror. And today I want to ask you, Sanjay Jha, what do you call those Pakistani fans who stood up in Hyderabad? I don't want to, talk about the Tebet test. The Tebet test is, of course, you must judge a crowd of immigrants. This is a British MP, as you might know, who said if they keep cheering for their own home team, so to speak, the ones that come from their own country of origin, then they're obviously not aligned with our constitution. That's what he said. But what do you do about this lot? Jeetega Pakistan, bhai jeetega. What nonsense is this? Should we not be ashamed? Sanjay Jha?
Yeah. Rahul, if you don't interrupt me, I'll give you a short answer.
Not at all.
Both Mr. Mitra and you, since both of you seem to be highly disturbed with Pakistan playing the World Cup in India, it would have made sense that instead of waiting after the World Cup has begun and nothing can be changed, you guys should have spoken to Jai Shah, Amit Shah's son, who, by the way, not just runs BCCI, but apparently has a huge weight in the ICC, to make sure that Pakistan never came to play the World Cup.
Okay.
I mean, after all, there is a BJP government at the center led by Mr. Modi.
Are you taking the high ground, Sanjay Jha? You represent the Congress party. No, hang on, just a minute. First of all, I wrote a piece.
Not to interrupt me, but you are.
No, one second. Sanjay ji, one second. I want you to answer a simple statement. No, you attacked me. You attacked me directly. I thought you were making a broader case. No, one second. You can't get away every night by attacking me personally. Just a minute. I wrote a piece, viewers. You can go to my timeline, you can go to the CNN News 18 website, and I have taken on the BCCI there as well as through my tweets as well as, of course, through my piece. But I want to ask you, Sanjay Jha, today, okay, it suits you politically, you're in the Congress party. At one time you were not, you were running a cricket website, I don't know if you still do. At that time, the same Congress invited Zia-ul Haq and the entire cricket team with Dr. Manmohan Singh in attendance, and in Mohali, they watched a match because they said, oh, cricket diplomacy chalegi desh mein. And what did we get for that, Sanjay Jha? The Congress party's great faith in cricket diplomacy and Aman Ki Asha and all that gunk, sentimental, mawkish gunk. I want to ask you, take a
Rahul,
stand for once.
So Rahul,
Take a stand. Come on, say that, look, this is unacceptable.
Taking a stance, and your viewers will be keen to hear me, not just the anchor. So if you don't interrupt me, I'll probably finish.
Not sure.
The Aman Ki Asha that you talked about actually was a very popular campaign run by the Times of India group, where you were employed for several years yourself.
And I'm a critic of that, and I paid for my outspokenness. I paid for my outspokenness, my dear man, unlike you, who is not calling out cricket diplomacy as being a failed bridge between India and Pakistan. You will not call it out because you're invested in cricket, aren't you?
So let me finish the cricket story. I'm glad you asked me because I have a personal narrative on that. 1 year after the Kargil war...
Well, look, I'll have to wrap it up. I've run out of time. If you hadn't wasted the time by attacking me personally, you might have actually had a point to make. I'll leave it at that. Anand Narsimhan coming up. Don't go away, viewers. It's a big show, The Right Stand. Watch.
يصدر من رعيم باتجاه قطاع غزة. ها هم جنودنا الذين أثخنوا في عدونا.
Namaste, Jai Hind, and welcome to this edition of The Right Stand. I'm Anand Narasimhan. At the top of this Thursday edition, ladies and gentlemen, data proves that women MPs' contribution has increased in Parliament. The data reveals that female MPs from the ruling party are asking more questions and have demonstrated a significantly higher level of scrutiny towards their own government and hold their ministries accountable. The interesting piece penned by Shamika Ravi and Prime Minister Narendra Modi acknowledging the enrichment of democracy due to women members of Parliament and hoping that Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam will further strengthen people's voice. Meanwhile, there's an increase in farm insurance enrollments for the last 2 years in a row. Last year also, the number of farmers opting for the state-run insurance scheme saw a 25% increase at 20.4 million. Association of Mutual Funds in India has said that the number of unique mutual fund investors has crossed the 40 million mark in September 2023. For the first time, the industry has received more than 16,000 crore through the SIP route in September. A KPMG report meanwhile reveals that Bharat requires at least $400 billion of annual investment by 2047 for clean energy goals to be met. The report also highlighted the acceleration of global and Indian energy transition will depend on investment in developing supply chains to meet the capacity deployment needs until 2030 and beyond. So some top-line numbers of what's happening across the country and what we need to do as a nation. But the larger geopolitical issue, even as Israel vows to end and totally uproot, wipe off Hamas, an interesting continuum emerges, a very dangerous one at that Iran openly says, and its religious head comes out and says, and as per media reports, that he wants to kiss the hands of the attackers who planned the attack on Israel. Meanwhile, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, say that the Hamas terrorists were carrying ISIS flags. Iran, Hamas, ISIS, a very dangerous continuum.
I want to go back to Friday. You know, I want to close my eyes and was all a nightmare.
Saturday morning the attack started. My parents managed to call her and talk to her. She told them that she was being shot at and she and her friends are running away.
It's been hard to find that light during the darkness of these past few days. A terrorist group like Hamas brought not only terror but sheer evil to the world. Evil that echoes the worst and matches, in some cases exceeds the worst atrocities of ISIS.
I was here predominantly to show solidarity to the Israeli people, to provide